We start our work at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Now the floor is given to Colonel Dmytro Hutsulyak, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine spokesperson on ATO-related issues. Good afternoon. During the last 24 hours, the militants of Russian occupation forces continued to shell the positions of the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine with calibers of artillery and mortars that are prohibited by the Minsk agreements. And as a result of the enemy shellings, no serviceman was wounded. The highest activity of the occupants was in the Lugansk sector. Here, 12 enemy shellings in the direction of our defenders were recorded. And in the evening, the enemy launched at the defense positions of the armed forces of Ukraine 15 shells near Pidlisna settlement with the use of artillery 152 mm of caliber and about 10 shells using 122 mm weaponry in the region of Lugansk. And our defense positions near Lugansk were under the most intense firing impact of the occupants. And here, during the last 24 hours, repeatedly, the enemy shelled our servicemen with the use of mortars of 120 and 82 mm of caliber, IVF weaponry, anti-aircraft systems, U-23-2, grenade launchers of different systems, and other types of infantry weapons. Shellings with the use of mortars of 120 mm of caliber and IFV weaponry. These shellings were delivered by the enemy near Troitsk, and also the enemy used grenade launchers and large caliber machine guns. The enemy used this weaponry against our forces near Zaitsevo and Novogorodska and twice near Novoalexandrovka. Servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine returned fire with the use of weapons that are not prohibited by the Minsk agreements. These are service infantry weapons. In the Donetsk sector, one precision enemy shelling was recorded at about 10 p.m. For about 2 hours. The occupants delivered fire with the use of mortars of 120 mm of caliber, grenade launchers, infantry weapons, and this was done against our defenders of Novotroitsk. During the last 24 hours, 13 enemy shellings were recorded, delivered by Russian occupation forces against the positions of Ukrainian armed forces. And the enemy launched 15 shells using artillery 152 mm of caliber, about 10 shells using 122 mm caliber, and about 80 mines using mortars of 120 mm and 82 mm of caliber. Our servicemen 7 times returned fire with the use of weapons that are not prohibited by the Minsk agreements. And also I would like to say that in the result of shelling delivered by Russian occupation forces, no defender of Ukraine was wounded. According to information provided by the main intelligence department of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Russian occupation power, in order to reinforce the control over the residents in the occupied territories of the east of Ukraine, carry out measures in order to create new military-like structures, security units with some police functions. It is envisaged that the main task of such units will be, under the pretext of maintenance of public order, they are going to suppress any actions of civil disobedience. The manning of the new structures will be done due to reservists who participated in training in January and February this year. And now about other news. In press center of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, a briefing was held concerning psychological rehabilitation of the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine. Head of main Department of Moral and Psychological Support of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Major General Oleg Grunkovsky, informed that the system of provision of psychological help and rehabilitation is active both in the region of completion of combat tasks and also in the region of restoration of combat readiness, or in places of permanent deployment. The means of preventive rehabilitation and psychocorrection is done by military psychologists and also visiting psychologists and high mobile groups of internal communication, civil organizations of volunteers with whom relative memorandums on cooperation were concluded. Psychological rehabilitation of the servicemen is the obligatory measure in order to restore combat capabilities of the units. And on the recommendation of military psychologists, visiting psychologists and the servicemen who have signs of combat psychological trauma, they are referred in an established order to medical institutions, centers of medical and psychological rehabilitation of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and civil institutions with which the state service for the issues of veterans and participants of ATO concluded agreements for these services of psychological rehabilitation. And parallel with national measures in the system of psychological rehabilitation that are carried out under coordination of the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, the work is ongoing to create a network of the regional centers of psychological rehabilitation for servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine that will be subordinated to the Defense Ministry. And this issue is now under control of the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. In Odessa, the representatives of Navy forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine held a working meeting with the foreign specialists in the framework of developing strategy of development of the national fleet until 2035. And the Navy commander of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Vice Admiral Igor Doranchenko, stated that the process of creation of the strategy will be held in several stages, and the result will be our vision of the development of the fleet according to the current challenges and threats. And the main aim of this event was to work on the requirements of current legislation of Ukraine concerning the role and place of Ukrainian Navy in the defense of national interests in sea, and also the analysis of the geopolitical environment around Ukraine and the Black Sea, the trend of development and identification of the purpose of fleet and the main values. And also this event was attended by the representatives of defense ministries of Great Britain, Norway, and the United States of America. It is worth noting that Navy forces of Ukraine they were represented both by the leadership and also by young officers that were trained abroad and repeatedly took part in international training. And lastly, I would like to inform that a delegation of U.S. representatives from the U.S. delegation headed by Congressman Ms. Ellie Stefanik and Mr. Anthony Brown visited International Center of Peacekeeping and Defense. And the main aim of the visit to Lvivshina was to get information and to observe training of the unit of the Armed Forces of Ukraine guided by U.S. instructors in the framework of activity of joint multinational group of support Ukraine. And the congressman met with the leadership of the National Academy of Land Forces and the Center of Peacekeeping and Security, and they also visited Center of Simulation Modeling at the National Center for Training of the Units. Foreign guests saw the work of tactical operative centers of brigades and battalions, and also they saw the work of the system of virtual modeling of the actions of command. Also, the congressman visited one of the training areas of the firing ground where they observed practical training of our servicemen under command of American and Ukrainian instructors. This is all. Thank you.